All right, so this video will show you how to create a pinecone using Grasshopper. Okay, so we've modeled this individual petal, and what we want to do is array this in a kind of radial direction and then have it scale as it goes up to create a pinecone. Maybe I should first flip this, so I'm just going to rotate this 180. Okay, so I have that geometry. So what I want to do is in Grasshopper, which this is the kind of graphic interpretation of the coding background of Rhino. So rather than typing in lines of code, in Grasshopper we add blocks together. So in this case, what we want to do is associate this polysurface with a block or a battery, also called a component in Grasshopper. All right, so if we pull in a B-rep, again, similar, it's synonymous with a polysurface. I'm going to take this polysurface, select this B-rep, and again, this was under geometry B-rep. I can select it and right-click the B-rep and say set one B-rep. With that selected, it now turns green. So now this component is being associated with this geometry. Okay, so anything I do as far as my steps from left to right, Grasshopper is going to do to this geometry in Rhino. And I'm going to see a real-time update of what that looks like here in the Rhino viewport. Just for simplicity, I'm going to hide these curves. Okay, so I have this petal. What I want to do is array this radially. So making this bigger. One of the first things to do in Grasshopper, I think by default, obscure components are turned off. Make sure this is turned on. So this should be blue here. Under View, Obscure Components, make sure that's turned on just so that you can see everything. Otherwise, it hides a lot of those things. All right, so you'll notice, just like Rhino, there's tabs in Grasshopper. Vector, curve, surface, mesh, intersect, transform. So under the transform tab, you'll see the array tab here. And just like in Rhino, you'll see the polar array. So we can click on that, drop it in. That's one way to grab a component, is to find it and then click on this. This is called the canvas. The other way to do that is to double click, and if you know the name of the component, you can just type polar array and you'll see it show up here. You can click on it and drop it in that way. All right, and in Grasshopper, it reads this script from left to right. So it's taking this B-rep, or this polysurface, and I want it to array that. So I'm going to move this to the right of it. And when you mouse over one of these little inputs, it'll tell you what it's looking for. So in this case, it's looking for a base geometry. Geometry is the general term. You know, you can really put anything into that. You can put a curve, a mesh, a surface, a polysurface in our case. And so its inputs are, it's asking for the geometry, it's asking for the plane on which to array the geometry, and it's asking for a number of elements to array. It's also asking for a sweep angle, which we're not going to use. Okay, so the first thing is the geometry. So I'm going to click and drag and drop this into the component. So by default, again, mousing over this, that number is set to 10, right? And so you're seeing the kind of real-time look of what that geometry is doing. And notice how it's using the default XYZ plane, right? So this plane is set, if I mouse over it, you see that it says world XY. So that's using the world XY plane as my center of rotation for that array. So it's going to keep using that center of rotation. Even if I move it over here, it's going to, again, array it about that point. So I can move this wherever I want, and it's going to array it continually around that. So if we're making a pine cone, I probably want this center to be at the origin. So I'm going to select it, type move in Rhino, select this, and then I could just try to get close, or I could just type 0, enter, and it'll move it to the origin. Okay, so now it's at the origin, which is where I'm arraying it about. And, you know, I could input a separate plane and have it be in another location, but I'm happy with where it is. The number of elements. So I can input a number into this. Now to do that, I can double click. Actually, let's show you this way. There's a couple ways we can do that. There's a panel. I can just do this, where I could type in anything into this. I can type in 5, click out of it, and it'll array it 5 times. So yeah, anytime I just type in a number, it'll array it that number. Another really useful thing is a number slider. So I can click on that, drop it in, and plug that in. So it's asking for not just any kind of number, this is an integer that it's looking for. So 0.25 won't really work. It wants whole numbers. So I can double click on this number slider and tell it I want integers. So you click on this N for integer, and you'll notice it's only 0 to 1 right now, so I can double click. I can give it a maximum. So I want this to be a range from 0 to, let's say, 20. And I can then play with this number slider and see how that affects my numbers here. So I can play with the number slider and see it react in real time. Okay, so now we're at 8 for that. All right, so we've now arrayed this a number of times. We can do 8. And okay, let's say we wanted to create a pine cone. Well, I want to move this vertically. Okay, so now I have all of that data is here. So you'll notice if I close Grasshopper, it goes away. So that means it's in Grasshopper. I haven't brought it into Rhino yet. So again, I can just type Grasshopper and this comes back. But always make sure you're saving your work. So I'm going to save this to the desktop. So save your Grasshopper work so that you can access it later. And what's happening here is that this geometry is associating with this geometry in the model. So I also want to make sure I'm saving my Rhino file as well, because it's going to associate with that. And there's more complex ways that you can kind of embed that in Grasshopper so you don't actually need the same Rhino file, but to keep things simple, we're just going to save both. Okay, make sure both are saved. All right, so we have this and we've arrayed it. So that information is here. Again, I want this in Rhino, so I can select that component, middle mouse click, and hit bake. Now when I close this, you'll see that this is all in Rhino. Okay, so this is all baked in. I can pull up Grasshopper again. In Rhino, I'm going to hit Control-Z to just have this one. Now what I want to do is take this, I want to move this up. Now I don't want to just move it up once, I want to move it up 15 times. Okay, so to move, I'm going to go back to, I'm going to make this bigger. So under Transform, under Euclidean, you'll see Move. So Euclidean space is the kind of Cartesian XYZ movement, so or translations. So here I have the move component. Move asks for two things. It asks for the geometry, and it asks for a vector. So where do you want to move it? Okay, so my geometry is going to be all this entire array, right? I want this whole thing to move. Okay, so that'll be the geometry I'm inputting. The translation vector, which direction are we going to be moving it in? Z. Yeah, so I can double click, give it a Z component, and that's also under vector. So you can go to vector and you can pull in any vector you want, X, Y, Z, or you can create your own vector if you want something that isn't there. So I want to move it in the Z direction. By default, this is set to 1 in whatever units you have set in Rhino. So I'm going to say I want this to move up 4.5, enter. So you can, this is another way to pull up a slider. Instead of going to params slider, I can just double click on the canvas and start typing a number. If I just type 5, it'll give me integers. If I double click and type 5.67, click, it'll give me decimal places with 2 decimal places. Here I just did 4.5, so it gives me 1 decimal place. All right, so with that, I can plug that in, and I can now move this up. That wasn't enough, so I'm going to double click this, set my max to 100. Now I can play with this a little more. I'll set this to 100. All right, and for the sake of this tutorial, I'm not going to rotate each one. I guess we could do that, but I want to keep things simple. So I've moved it once. But I don't want to just move it once, I want to move it 15 times. So what I want to do is tell this distance, don't just move it 43, move it a range of numbers. I want to move it, let's say 50, I want to move it 100, 150, a series of numbers, okay? So what I need is a series. So that instead of this discrete single number, I'm going to disconnect by holding Control, disconnect. So now it's there. I want 50, I want 100, I want 150. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create a series. And so that's under, I think it's under math here. It might be under sets. Sequence, series. So with a series, you can tell it the first number in the series, the step size, so in my case, a step size of 50, and the number of values total. So I want 15 of them, and I want them to increase by 50 each time. So first number, let's say the first number is 50, because I want it to move up 50. The step size, I also want that to be increments of 50. And the number of values, I want 15 of them. All right, so before I plug this in and we see what it did, I want to see a preview of that. So I can double click and I can hold Shift quote, and that's the shortcut to pull up a panel. And if I just want to see what it's outputting, this is a really useful thing. So it's doing what I was hoping. So 50, it's giving me these numbers, 50, 100, 150, 200 in sequence like that. So it's giving me, 14. Remember, computers always start counting with 0. So this is 0 through 14, which is 15 numbers. All right, so that's what we're looking for. So all 15 of those are going to go into this. What is happening? So this is one of those confusions where the data is getting confused. So instead of seeing all of this as one thing, if I mouse over this, it's actually getting 8 different things. And so it's moving this one 50, this one 100, this one 150, and so on. So it's getting confused. All right, so this is a data issue. If you graphed this, now what it's doing is it's saying apply this transformation to everything coming in, not each individual one. All right, so now we're a little bit closer. I probably want these to scale, so the higher up it gets, the smaller it gets. So what I can do is take each of these. Let's see, do I want to scale it before I move it? No, I can't really do that. Why don't we scale each one? So I'm going to hit scale. And yeah, I guess we can scale 3-dimensionally. So I'll take this geometry. Scale asks for 3 things. It asks for the geometry to scale. It asks for the center of scaling and how much you want to scale it by. And the center, in this case, so I'm going to create a point using this vector tab construct point. Drop that in. You can also get there by double clicking and typing construct point, clicking on this. So either way will get you there. So I have this point at the origin. I'm going to take that and move it in the same way that I'm moving all of this geometry. So I'm going to take this, Control C, Control V. So now I've duplicated the move component, and the geometry is now this point. So now if you see in green, it's moving that origin point or that XY point up the same amount. All right, so now I have centers for my scale operation. So now when it's scaling it around the center point for each one, for each step. Okay, so I'm going to hide some of this to make it more clear. Preview off. If I right click. All right, so I've scaled it. The problem now is that I'm scaling it evenly. I want this to scale variably. I want it to scale by, 90%, 80%, and then make it smaller. So what's happening is my scale factor needs to change. So what I need to do is give it another series of values. I'm just going to double click and type series. And it's going crazy. I'm gonna, because it's calculating a lot of things that I don't want it to go haywire, so I'm gonna right click this temporarily, hit disable. It turns gray, it's not gonna calculate it, so I don't have to worry about crashing my computer when I type in 1,000 here accidentally. So the first number in the series, so I want it to scale by, let's say, 0.9. The step size, so I want to go 0.8, 0.7, so 0.1. And the number of them, I can either type 15 or I can just tie in this. So anytime I change it here, it'll also change it here. So going back, right clicking, hitting enable. It's scaling the wrong way, which I thought would happen. So I need to somehow tell it the step size should be negative. So instead of 0.1, I want this negative 0.1, which is doable. I can just set this minimum to -1. So now I can pull this down and get that to happen. It's scaling it 15 times. Oh, so what's happening is it's going, going maximum and then building back up because I'm continuing to step in that number. So what I should do is reduce this, I guess. My step size is too big, so I will set the increments. I want to be able to change this to 3 decimal places so that I can do this. All right, so now we have a Christmas tree.
Pinecone Christmas tree.
Yeah. And I guess we could rotate each one too. Yeah, I mean, any of these things you can rotate after. So for this case, we just wanted to do it all in Grasshopper parametrically. Let's do a rotate as well. So rotate. So this rotates around an axis. I just need a simple rotate. So double click rotate, ask for the geometry. To rotate, it asks for an angle of rotation in radians. I want to convert that to degrees. So you right click, set it to degrees. And I want the rotation plane to be my XY, that's fine. So all this geometry is being rotated. How much? I give it an angle here. So let's say 30 degrees each time. But notice it's doing them all. So again, I don't want to just give it one number, I want to give it a series. So I want it to start at 30, increase by 30. I can actually just take this, plug it in here. And maximum number, 15. I can plug that in. Oops, not wrong one. So plug it into this. And I'm going to hide everything else.
So you have to plug in the rotate to the series, not the series to the rotate?
Plug in the series into this rotate. And I could have gone this way or I could have gone that way. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it's connected. Yep. And so now each one is rotated. And if I look from a top view, this is really cool. You get a Fibonacci.
Okay, that's good. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That's a good one. That's cool.
All right, so that's how to create a pine tree or a pine cone in Grasshopper.
You said you're